I'm going to go ahead and turn the meeting over to Lori Lacefield, who is our program director, and she will moderate tonight's program for us. So Lori, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. So welcome everyone. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Tonight's session will be a Q&A format, but because of the number of attendees and in order to prevent everyone from talking over one another, we've muted all the participants, and we're going to take your questions using the chat feature. So to send a question, if everyone could select the chat, hopefully you've already done that, at the bottom of your screen. And if you see the chat window on your right-hand side, you'll see a little "to" drop-down box. If you will select, instead of everyone, select Lori Lacefield and send that to me. So please don't send your question to everyone. I'm going to be monitoring the questions and I'll ask them in the order they're received. That'll allow Angie to focus on the single question at hand, not get distracted by the chat box or any other dialogue going on, and should make for a smoother session for viewing and recording, since we're recording this as well. Okay, so any questions you have, go ahead and start sending them in. And in the meantime, I will start by introducing Angie. Does everyone, I was joined a little late. Does everyone know that Terry was unable to join us tonight? Okay, so Terry Wolf was also going to join us tonight. She had some medical emergencies this week, and so she will not be able to join us, but we have Angie Hodapp. Thank you very much for joining us, Angie. So Angie is the Director of Literary Development at Nelson Literary Agency and the author of Do You Need a Literary Agent? And Querycraft, the Writer in the Know Guide to Getting Your Manuscript Requested. She holds a BA in English and Secondary Education and an MA in English and Communication Development. A graduate of the Publishing Institute at the University of Denver, she has worked in professional writing, editing, and education for more than 20 years. A frequent presenter at writing conferences and events, she loves helping writers improve their craft and learn about the ever-changing world of publishing, which is in quite a state right now, as is everything. So I'll just get it started here. Angie, so you're Director of Literary Development. So can you tell us, what's a typical day in the office like for you? What tasks do you focus on for the agency and the authors they represent?
Sure. Thanks for having me, by the way. I'm happy to be here. And I know most of you, I think, if not well, I've at least met some of you at different conferences and events. And those I don't know, I look forward to getting to know you. And congratulations on finding your way to just a really fantastic writing community here. I think community is so important. So welcome, and don't be shy, speak up. So I have been with Nelson Agency here in Denver, Colorado. This is my 10th year there. Before that, I was working in magazines, and I like this better. I should mention, I'm so sorry Terry wasn't able to be here and that you're stuck with me. I myself am not an agent. I don't take on clients. My job is more along the lines of in-house editor. So I read a lot of queries that come in for our agent team. We have 4 agents at Nelson Literary Agency, so I read for all of them. I request manuscripts, I read the manuscripts, I make recommendations. I partner with all of our agents if they need some support. If they fall behind, I can jump in and read with them. And I do full manuscript edits for our existing clients to help our agents get those manuscripts ready to go out to acquiring editors. So I actually wrote a book which was mentioned in my kind intro. Thank you, Lori. Do you need a literary agent? And this book is kind of 16 steps of what the publishing industry is. And the first 8 steps are kind of like writing the book and getting the agent. And then the 8 steps, 8 through 16, are kind of after you have the agent or after you've already become published, whether you have an agent or not. And that goes into things like reading your royalty statements, which is something that I started doing when I was very new at the agency. I did royalties audits, and I did contracts reviews. So there's information in here too about how to audit your royalty statements, what to look for in contracts, what to walk away from, and then also how to get your rights back from your publisher, which is the very last step. So that's my job there has kind of evolved over the years, but mainly it's submissions and reading and in-house editorial, and then I do some marketing for the agency as well. So I create the catalogs. When our agents go to the big international book fairs, which are all online right now, we create our rights catalogs that we can go and sell foreign rights, and we can sell TV and movie rights. Yeah, so we have to have material to show those co-agents and those publishers, and I create those too. So that's what I do.
Great. So talking about your book, Do You Need a Literary Agent? Should all authors strive to get a literary agent, or are there cases where they don't need one?
There are definitely cases where you don't need one. And that was a big reason that I wrote the book. It's very author centric. I just want authors to understand the industry. And I think what happens is authors will finish a book, they finish a manuscript, and they know, or they think they know that the next step is to query it, right? Get the agent. But I think a lot of writers don't stop and think, wait a minute, do I actually need one? And that's why I titled the book, Do You Need a Literary Agent? Because sometimes the answer is no. It really does depend on your goals as a writer. It depends on how you define success. It depends on how happy you are with the reach that would be available to you as an independently published author, or an author with a small press that doesn't require agency representation for its authors. There are definitely some doors that can be opened for you if you do have an agent that would otherwise be closed, but those aren't necessarily doors that everybody cares to have open for them. So it really does depend. If you're a more independently minded person, if you're a little more like, I want to write this and get it out there and work on the next thing, traditional publishing moves very slowly. So that might be very frustrating for you as a writer. And so the agent process might not be your best fit.
What would you say agents can do for authors that they can't do for themselves?
So the big 5 publishers in New York right now, and every time I try to list them, I always forget one. Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, Hachette, help me, Scholastic? No, it's not Scholastic. I always forget, HarperCollins. Okay, so the big 5.
There's been so many mergers, I get lost on who's the like parent company now.
Right, yeah, and it used to be the big 6 until 2012 or 13 when Penguin and Random House joined forces. So they have, among the 5 of them, they have hundreds and hundreds of imprints that are all pretty much independently operated. And very, very few of those will read a manuscript by an author who is unagented. So that's probably the first big door that an agent can open for you, is getting your manuscript evaluated and acquired by a big New York publisher. Foreign rights are very, very, very lucrative. I think a lot of newer authors underestimate the amount of money that's available, the amount of income that's available to you when you sell into those foreign territories. and get your book published in translation. So a lot of those, it's really, really tough. Not impossible, but really, really tough to get your book seen in foreign markets without an agent who's actively going to Frankfurt, going to Bologna, going to London, going to the international book fairs to have these face-to-face sales meetings with your book on the table between them. Same with TV and movie rights. Not unheard of for an independently published author to break in, but typically you have to have quite a bit of jaw-dropping success as an indie in order to really catch the eye of any kind of a, we call those performance rights, but film and film and TV rights. So those are kind of the big things that agents can do for you that would be very difficult to do for yourself as an independently published author.
I have a question from Chris. She says, how do agencies decide which book will be the lead titles when they go to places like Frankfurt Book Festival?
Good question. So agencies, I'll step back a minute and answer how agents, we don't really have a say. When we sell a book to a big five, we don't really have a say whether or not that book is going to be on their front list, is going to be like, that 80-20 rule, right? Like 20% of a publisher's seasonal list is going to get 80% of their marketing push. There are exceptions. So if a book goes to auction, meaning like Kristen, who's my boss as an agent, might go sell a book or send it out to several editors, and more than one editor might want to buy it, that can go to an auction where now we have editors bidding to buy that book for their house. And that can become a negotiation tool during that auction. So we actually placed a pretty successful author, this is years ago now, and what it came down to was he had an offer from a big house and an offer from kind of a medium house. The big house, we kind of knew he was going to get lost, right? He was going to be a debut. He was going to be kind of a little fish in a big pond. The medium house was like, we are going to make you lead title. And that's how they won the auction. And the author decided to go and be their lead title author. And that turned out to be a really good career choice for that author. So as far as going into the foreign markets, when we're preparing our marketing materials to go to, like, let's say Bologna, because that's the one that we just finished up. And that's the big international children's rights fair. So that's picture books in middle grade and young adult. And we really take everything. We take everything that we have that's going to be kind of new, that just came out, or that's going to be coming out in the next 6 or 8 months. And that is because every single foreign market has different tastes. And so we just don't know. We can predict a little bit like what Korea is looking for versus what Brazil likes. Like Brazil and Turkey love horror. Who knew? France loves romance. Shocking, right? Now, here's something interesting. When you sell a book into Japan, they won't buy books that are like 70 to 80 to 90,000 words, which we think of as novel length in the English language. They want smaller works because there are so many characters in Japanese that the ink on the page forces more pages, right? So they want something that like a 50 to 60,000 word count in the English language will translate to a novel-sized printed material there. So that was something we kind of had to figure out. If you sell them a bigger book, they want to split it into 2 volumes. So you kind of learn what each foreign market is looking for. You show them what you have. You kind of pitch what you think they'll be interested in, and sometimes they surprise you.
Great. Catherine says, I have an agent for some of my books, but not my small press books. She doesn't seem to mind that I have a small publisher series going. Is that unusual?
No, that's pretty typical, actually. When you sign with an agent, if you have a history of having self-published some works in the past, you might, obviously you'll tell this agent that you're thinking of signing with that you have a publishing history. And the thing is, you just want to make sure that your agency agreement, which is the agreement, the contract that you as the author sign with your agent, right? That's kind of like your marriage contract. And so you have to kind of make sure that that agency agreement frees you up to continue to write, you know, for yourself. If you have a successful indie published series that you want to keep writing on the side, then most agents are going to be okay with that. They want to sign you for the book you queried them with. So that'll be a different track for you. And you might have conversations with that agent about what names you write under, right? You might want to write, she might want to break you out into the traditional space with a different name to separate you from your indie stuff. Or if your indie stuff is really successful, hey, awesome, let's leverage that and bring those readers over to your traditional stuff too. You also want to make sure your agency agreement protects your income from your independently published works from that agent. The only reason an agent should be earning any income on stuff you brought to the table with you before is if they sell additional rights to that work, right? If you come with a trilogy that you wrote and published yourself, and they're like, hey, I can sell this, you know, abroad, then yeah, they should earn a commission on that. But you shouldn't be giving them a cut of the domestic sales or income that you're still earning from that series.
So if agents are more receptive and they're okay with it, with the indie authors, what about publishers? I mean, have they changed their perception? It used to be, I think, pretty much standard that if you had gone the self-publishing route, they didn't even want to talk to you. Has that perception started to change?
Oh yeah, I think it already has changed quite a bit. And as I said before, I've been at Nelson Agency. This is my 10th year there. So I was there at the beginning, I mean, before ebook terms were really figured out, like how do we pay royalties on ebook sales? Like, you know, the publishers didn't really know what to do with that. So I think in the early days of self-publishing, and most of that, of course, happening on Amazon, query letters would come in. And they still do. We still get a lot of query letters from writers who are like, hey, I self-published this and I sold 5 copies. I need help, right? I'd like to try this, you know, a traditional route. I'd like to try to get an agent. And we were getting those at the time. And I think a lot of agents, as soon as they saw self-published, they just sent a rejection. And so publishers probably didn't even see a lot of those because agents were pre-screening them. But I think once New York, and I say New York, once publishers realized that, wow, there's a lot of talent happening out there with independently published authors, and Amazon is making tons of money by creating this platform for these self-published writers to get their work out. Like, I think they started realizing there weren't as many delineators as they thought there were. And so, of course, then they started cherry picking, right? Then they would go and agents started doing the same thing. As soon as you'd see an author doing really, really well in the self-pub sphere, you had agents knocking on your door. So yeah, I think that the perception, most authors at this point are hybrid, or they want the opportunity to be hybrid. So even if you're writing, you know, even if you've been in a big 5 imprint and you're on 30 books with Harlequin or whatever, you still want to have that available to you to write and publish things on the side. And that's called the hybrid model, and everyone does it.
So I think this might answer already Sue's question, but she said, if you have a series with an indie press, can you take a new series or standalone book to an agent for consideration and still keep your relationship with the indie?
You know, I don't see why not, and I think that might be up to the indie, if they want to continue working with you, if you started looking for other publishing partners. But I think what's difficult for an agency is if we get a submission and it says, I self-published book 1, and now I would like you to represent book 2 and on. And that's kind of probably not going to work. Think of each series as kind of a distinct unit, even if you're continuing to write forward in that. If you want a publishing partner or a publishing team around a series, it's best to have that begin with book 1. And there are exceptions. Jean Stein, who's used to be a local Denver author until she went and moved to Lake Havasu. I'm not sure I've forgiven her for that. But she started writing paranormal and urban fantasy back in the 90s, and she sold book 1 to a small press. Then she sold book 2 to Penguin and wrote 9 more books with Penguin. She still, and I might be wrong about this, but I think she still can't get her rights back for book 1 from that small press. And that's a contracts issue. Signing, sometimes when you're a newer author and you're signing with a small press and you think a lot of stuff is going down on good faith, you can get burned really, really badly later on in life. So yeah, but she was really lucky, and I think she's the exception to the rule that her series got picked up by a big 5 after book 1 was already out. So anything can happen. It's just it's better to approach an agent with a new idea and a new finished project.
Okay, great. Danelle asked, you didn't mention Amazon. Is that considered outside of the big 5? For example, Thomas and Mercer and Montlake, Lake Union, and those imprints?
Correct. Yeah, the Amazon imprints are not considered big 5. I think they're considered mid-level press, and I would include which doesn't mean that they're not huge and doing amazing work, because they are, but like HMH, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and Source Books are a couple of other, 5-star does great work. So you have these established publishing companies that just aren't, the big 5. And the reason the big 5 are so big is they've been around forever. They have global interests. I mean, these are not mom and pop shops, like some of the presses that I just mentioned. So yeah, there's, and I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, whether or not you need an agent to get a contract with, say, Thomas and Mercer or Lake Union. Does anyone know? Throw it in the chat if you know. We actually, we have tons of clients with projects who are not with big 5 publishers. But so, agenting, we represent those projects even with smaller publishers, and we just make sure, your contract isn't gonna come back to bite you.
Margaret asked, are publishing houses taking a pause right now? Have sales slowed down?
Very good question, and I had hoped this would come up. Keep writing throughout this, because yes, there have been changes and there's a lot of uncertainty in publishing right now. But we get weekly updates from the bigger publishers about what they're doing. A lot of their editors are, working from home now. However, we have seen editors get laid off. We have seen editors get flat out fired. Like, we're just going to let you go. We're not furloughing you and bringing you back later. We've seen some companies take their editors down to a 4-day work week. We've seen some editors lose income, salary reduction of 20%. So we're seeing the big 5 take some austerity measures. However, they're all assuring us that they're continuing to read, they're continuing to acquire, and everybody's kind of bracing right now watching book sales, because somebody earlier in introductions mentioned 5-star is kind of slowing down, right? Because they're library market and libraries are closed. So same thing with Thorndike, which does large print editions. Libraries are their biggest market. So we just got a notification from Thorndike that's like, hey guys, we're going to slow down here. And that usually is a sub-rights deal. So if you sell your book to Macmillan, Macmillan sells the rights to Thorndike to do the large print edition, and then that advance comes down to you and is reported on your royalty statement. So you'll probably see a reduction in income from large print. So we're seeing it affect weird little inroads to publishing, and nobody really knows, but we're kind of surprised that books are selling really well. Ebooks, of course, are dominating because people are reading ebooks. However, we're also noticing that Target and Walmart, which is huge. If your publisher places your book with Target and Walmart, you know, you want that. That's awesome. And they're buying tons of books right now. So that's carrying a big part of the fiction market for us right now. So while the indies are kind of, I don't want to say struggling, I think they're innovating. I think smaller bookstores are really innovating and finding good ways to stay in business and to support authors. But I think, again, we just don't really know, and changes are occurring. So what that's looked like for us, so far, none of our advances have changed. We haven't been asked to reduce the amount of an advance that an author's been under contract for. Royalties are staying the same. We're negotiating contracts right now, the same as we always did. So yeah, it's kind of a wait and see, but I think as authors, the most important thing to know is to just keep writing. You know, the best thing you can, the best case scenario is you come out the other end of this with a new book to sell, versus coming out and going, oh, okay, now I can start writing again because I feel better about the stability of the marketplace. So yeah, keep writing.
So you mentioned ebooks. Margaret said, I've noticed that some publishers are releasing ebooks now and delaying the release of their print books. Is that a generalized strategy or only specific to a few publishers?
That I don't know. The formats that your book is going to be published in are laid out in your contract. So for instance, at Nelson Agency, we will always negotiate, well, I shouldn't say negotiate, we will not allow a publisher to do an ebook initial release. It has to come out in print first or concurrent with ebook. And whether that's a hardcover or an initial paperback release. And that's just because we want to work with publishers who are going to support the book. And it's easy to put an ebook out there and not really have to do anything to promote it. So that's just kind of what our agency does. However, it does make sense to me that publishers at this point would be like, hey, you know, we don't have anywhere to sell books if we send it to the printer right now. So in that case, I would say there needs to be an addendum to the contract that everyone needs to sign off on. Hey, this is what we're going to do because we're under extraordinary circumstances here. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me, and I don't think it's probably a bad thing. It's just that, of course, margins are a lot smaller with ebook earnings than they are with print earnings.
Let's shift gears a little bit. There's some questions about markets and query letters. So for Sabrina, she said, can you tell us more about what would get your attention from a query letter?
Yes. So I do read hundreds of query letters every week, and I just wrote a book. I wrote 225 pages about how to write a one-page query letter. So that should tell you a little bit about me as a writer. I write big. But yeah, so query letters are basically in 4 parts, one of which is optional. So I like to say right at the top of your query letter is your greeting. That's the optional part. Like, dear Krista Nelson, I heard you speak at the Rocky Mountain chapter of Mystery Writers of America. I liked what you had to say and I wanted to send you my query. Like any kind of just quick 1 sentence, 2 sentence maybe introduction to who you are and why this is the agent that you're querying for this project. That's kind of rolled into the project summary, which is title, title, genre, and word count. Those 3 things must be present in your query letter. That's followed by the pitch, which should take up the most amount of real estate in your query letter, right? You should have a little bit intro, a little bit of project summary at the top. Pitch, get to the pitch. I can't stress that enough. Don't make me hunt for your pitch in your query letter. And then that's typically wrapped up at the very bottom with a bio, just 2 or 3 sentences about you, your whatever publishing experience you have. If you're a debut, that's fine. It's not going to work against you that this is your first project because it's all about the pitch. So that's kind of the, I don't know if you can see my hands in the screen, but that's kind of what the real estate should look like. So I see a lot of query letters where it's all bio. And then it's like, you know, I have to look for 1 or 2 sentence log line and then they sign off. And that's a mishandling of your query letter because you have this page to sell your book. So use the page to sell your book. Your bio is not going to sell the book. Flattery to the agent is not going to sell your book. The pitch is what's going to sell your book. So use that space wisely.
Great. ZJ asked, what genres do you see trending up, trending down? In other words, what's hot and what's not?
Yeah,
especially now. I've seen a lot of questions too about what if you write apocalyptic pandemic thrillers? Should you even bother right now, or should you just table them?
Yeah, I've made this prediction online. If anyone follows me on Facebook, you've seen me make this prediction, and I'm not alone in this. I think so. You understand that books that agents are signing now are going to go out on submission within a couple of months, and then it'll be 18 to 24 months after that before your book hits shelves. So 12 months is, you know, a positive scenario, but 18 months is pretty standard for before the book is going to hit the shelf. So my guess is that 18 months from now, 24 months from now, we're going to see funny fiction and hopeful fiction and lighthearted and comedy, romantic comedy. We're going to see poignancy. You know, I use Woodstock as the example. In 1969, our country was at war and Woodstock was all about peace. Then 1999 rolls around and they try to do Woodstock again. I was there, by the way. We were in a time of peace and prosperity and nobody there knew how to behave. It was chaos. They were ripping the walls down. They were rioting. It was ridiculous. So in a time of peace, people want war. And I kind of feel that's what we're going to see in fiction. When we're in a period of everything's great, we write dystopias and we write apocalypse novels. But now we're in this period of like, oh, you know, stuff just got real. And we're going to escape from that by writing different things. That's my prediction. Where were we before we went into this? So yeah, if you were already writing a pandemic story or a virus, an outbreak thriller, for instance, I'm not saying don't query it. You never know what's going to happen. And you know, 100% of the books that don't get queried don't get rep. You know, you never know what's going to happen. And in fact, so Nelson Agency does a newsletter. We have a newsletter coming out tomorrow if we get it launched. And Joanna McKenzie, who is our agent, who, by the way, is acquiring thrillers and mysteries. She wrote the guest article. And she and I kind of worked on it together. And it's really about this very topic, like what can we write about right now? And so what we kind of came up with was we'd love to see stories where the pandemic kind of is the inciting incident, but it's not the thing the story is about. So we're not necessarily looking for these outbreak thrillers where your heroes are medical doctors and scientists and your villains are, you know, politically motivated. We're not really looking for that, but she was talking about something she saw where because of the pandemic, two sisters, one goes into quarantine and the other steals her identity, right? So now the quarantine has become a springboard for a different type of conflict. And so playing with the circumstances we're in right now to come up with like unique stories, like, yeah, we would totally want to see that. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. But that's just us.
Let's see. Sue says, what changes in the industry brought on by the pandemic do you think will stick long term?
I think work from home is going to stick long term. I think people are realizing that we're keeping the industry going from the comfort of our homes. And I think that's probably going to be true of a lot of industries, not just publishing. I don't think it hurts for there to be austerity measures. I'm kind of conservative fiscally myself. So, you know, maybe that's a good thing. Will it? I think it'll bring advances down, unfortunately. So I don't think we're going to see really big six-figure advances for a while. I think that's going to take a long time to recover. We might even see royalties come down for print editions, for hardcover and paperback editions. So that's going to be kind of a challenge for agents moving forward, because every agency has a boilerplate contract with each house that they sell to. So every time they make a new deal with that house, they already have pre-negotiated most of those boilerplate items, and they just have to plug in deal terms for that particular deal. But all those boilerplates are going to have to be renegotiated, I think. You know, this is just me spitballing here, but, you know, if the industry is going into a period, whether it's short-term or long-term, where they can't sustain big advances or big royalties, then yeah, we're going to have to, the standard of that will change. Coming back out of that will be very, very hard. But it, you know, I still have hope, and I still think that innovation, we have yet to see the good stuff that's going to happen too, and it will. Not all changes are going to be for the worse.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion recently about an article, and now I can't remember who published it, but it went pretty widespread, talking about how a lot of the publishers were only going to be looking for the top 1 of the 1% to even accept as a contract now. To really have something that's more of a guarantee, it has to be, where it used to be high concept, now it has to be the highest of high concept. And there was a lot of internet discussion around that. It was kind of a depressing article for a lot of people that were just trying to get in, authors that are trying to get in right now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and that makes sense. I think, you know, along with smaller advances will be fewer acquisitions, and that's reasonable to assume, and disheartening. But keep in mind that they were only really ever looking at the top 1% anyway, or, you know, let's say the top 2%, right? And so the jump from 2% to 1%, yes, it's a shrinking, but it's not that bad. And all that writers can ever do, like all we can ever do, is think about the things we can change. What things can we affect? And it's 3 things. It's what you write, it's how much you write, and it's how well you write. And how well you write, you know, has to do with, are you continuing to hone your craft? Are you continuing to foster community and get feedback? And are you reading what other people are writing in your genre right now? Like, that's all that you can focus on. And so if the pandemic has you in a place right now where you're not writing, that's okay, right? And there's a lot of people who are stuck right now because there's a lot of fear. And I don't mean to go on this big counseling session, but there's a lot of fear, and our clients are feeling it too. And but again, don't let that stop you from writing. It might be the very thing that saves you or someone else. You know, your story goes out and touches somebody, and that's why we do this, right?
Great point. Yep. Kathleen says, I loved both of your books. I noticed many agents who use Query Manager ask for the first 5 pages. Do you want the inciting incident to happen in those first 5 pages? If not, how far along should the story be in the first 5 pages?
Excellent question. I am a pretty open-minded reader because I think when I was newer to this, I had like this very prescribed set of rules, like the inciting incident must happen in the first 10 pages. But the more that I love reading, I always have loved reading, and I continue to read what's being published today because I have to know what I'm looking for, what it will be up against if we take it on. And the more I read, the more I see those rules broken beautifully. And it's like, all right, well, you know, Ready Player One had like pages and pages of backstory and exposition at the very beginning, but it worked. And that I think was because the hook was so strong. Now that question really also does have to do with genre, right? Because if you're writing a more commercial genre, and I would put mystery in that bucket, generally I would, we'll come back to that. Then yeah, readers have some expectations, right? They don't want to slog through, 20 pages of backstory or whatever before they get to the good stuff, right? It's like me saying, get to the pitch. It's about the pitch, right? Get to the inciting incident. So reader expectation for your genre will affect how you execute the story. If you're writing more like upmarket, borderline literary type thrillers, you have a lot more leeway. You have a lot more lateral room to kind of play with structure and to kind of craft the story and different ways to invite the reader into the story. Yeah, so I don't know. A good example that I just finished was Saint X. It was called Saint X. It's very psychological, and it just. I didn't get that. Oh, could you try? My watch activated, but it's very literary, but it's also very tense, and just the way she executes that story is stunning. So yeah, just paying attention to what authors are doing will help you, I think, kind of guide you into how you want to introduce writers to your story, or readers rather, to your particular story. So yeah, I guess in sum, I don't really, for me as a reader, I'm looking in those first 5 pages, or we do 10 pages in Query Manager. If I get through your query letter and actually I'm looking down at your sample, what I'm looking for right there is voice. I'm not necessarily looking for inciting incident. I want to know that you can write, and I want this to be a voice that I want to spend 90,000 words with, and just that mastery of language. And that's what we can see within a sentence or two. So yeah.
That's a great point. Suzanne said somewhere in the mid-90s, an agent said that a typical advance was 5,000, give or take a couple of thousand either way. What is it now?
So it varies by market. If you write for middle grade, for YA, for the adult market, and it varies by genre. And it varies by initial format. So if we're looking at a book that's kind of outside the box, that's a little upmarket, we're going to push for a hardcover release, and that of, I'm spitballing here. It's been a while. We actually have a contracts person who works for the agency now doing just contracts. So it's been a long time since I've had my hands on that side of the business. But 25,000 wouldn't be unheard of. So I think YA fantasy is kind of waning at this point. It's just very, very saturated. It's still being bought up, but that's for a long time. That's where we were seeing the biggest advances is YA fantasy, especially for trilogies. So, I mean, those were getting like, $100,000 a book for a 3-book contract. But again, so saturated. So the competition there is a little stronger. In something that's going to paperback initially, yeah, depending on the publisher too. If it's a smaller publisher, a few $1,000s would be, 5, 10, 15, 20 would be great. But it's so much of advances right now also have to do, not right now with pandemic, but just in general, it has to do with each season. Like how much money does a publisher have in their coffers, right? Because when your book goes to ed board, when the editor who wants to acquire your book, they have to take your book to a meeting of their peers and their publisher, and they have to make a case for it. They can't just say, sure, agent, I want to buy that, right? They have to get approval on their end. And so they have to pitch your book to their peers. And then the publishers, they're, doing the numbers, like who can we offer what to? And that, that changes season to season.
Okay, I'm just going back through here, see what questions I've missed. Margaret, are we going to 8 or 8:15? What's the timeline?
And I'm good. I can go as long as you want.
Oh, great, Angie. That sounds good. It's rather open-ended. We had planned to go to about 8:15, but if we need a little more time, that's okay. If we need to end sooner, that's okay.
Okay, let me see. Okay. No more questions, people? I think I've gotten everything, or have I missed anybody? I could think of so many questions, but
I will take some time then to say that since Kevin Wolf wouldn't pat his own back, I have a copy of his book, The Home Place, in my office right now. My husband, Warren Hammond, who's an RMMWA member, who's downstairs right now, we just moved to a new house. And so we did like this huge purge, and I got rid of so many books. Kevin, your book made the cut. I still have it. And the other thing is that my husband Warren and I, we edited the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers anthology in 2018 called False Faces. And Suzanne Prue is here. You guys might know this already, but if you don't, I want to pat her on the back too. She was one of 2 stories in here that was picked up by the America's Best Mystery Stories anthology. Oh, she's going to hold it up. Yay! Yay. So Suzanne's story is in here. Another story from here is in the best, and a third story in False Faces also made the honorable mentions in the back of Best Mystery Stories. So kudos to those writers.
okay, now we've got a few more questions coming in. It seems several small presses have folded recently. Is that true?
It might be. I'm not really very familiar with very small presses, but I do know the old adage, which is, how do you make a small fortune in publishing? You start with a large fortune. And Kathy's saying it along with me. It's very hard to make money, not only as a writer, but as a small business person in this industry. And I think a lot of that has to do with it's dominated by these huge, global companies. So it's very, very difficult to compete, and it's saturated anyway, right? You talk to anybody that you meet at a class reunion or a family reunion, and everybody's got a book in them. Everybody's got a book in them. Everyone wants to be a writer. But very, very precious few of those people actually ever finish a manuscript, right? So I don't really know what my point was. But yeah, I think it's not surprising to me that there are some small presses out there that they kind of come and go. They give it a shot. They get bought and sold. Some of the small presses actually get bought by mid-sized presses who will come in and purchase their backlist and take over those authors, which can be good. Which, by the way, should also be part of your contract, your publishing contract. In the case that the publisher goes under while your contract is still active, you want those rights to come back to you. You don't want your rights to be caught up as an asset in any kind of legal proceeding. Or mergers and acquisitions kind of thing. So make it your choice to move with that publishing company versus a given.
Is that a standard now that as part of the contract, you ask to get the rights back at some point?
Yes. Smaller presses, and even some mid-sized presses there will be a term of contract or a term of license. So your contract might say 7 days or 7 years from the date of publication or from the date of the contract, whatever, the rights will revert to you. Awesome. If you can get a term of license, that's great. You will not get a term of license from a Big 5 contract. What you'll get is a threshold for getting your rights back. So that'll say typically, if in 2 consecutive accounting periods, and accounting periods are 6 months, so they're looking at typically a 12-month period. If in 2 consecutive accounting periods, unit sales of your book fall below, say 300, then you may ask for the rights back. You can write us a letter and you can ask. And we, as the publisher, can decide, okay, you can have the rights back, or no, we're gonna do another print run, or we're gonna do a marketing push and try to sell what's left in our warehouse, or we're gonna renegotiate with you, or whatever. So that can be really, really tough. So getting your out of print clause well negotiated in a contract is another really good reason to have a good agent on your side who knows what that threshold should be for your readership, for your genre, what sales can be kind of expected to reach. So the other one would be, that's unit sales. The other threshold might be earnings. So if in 2 consecutive accounting periods, the author earns less than this amount of money, you can write us a letter and ask. The worst, and I shouldn't say this out loud because I'm being recorded, but I will tell you anyway, the hardest company to get your rights back from is HarperCollins. They will come up with every reason not to have to give you your rights back. So that's kind of a bummer. So if you're okay with, never, we have one author whose book came out in 2007, and it was an original mass market paperback, science fiction. I mean, this is not one that was going to be a huge moneymaker anyway. And the contract had an "and" in it instead of an "or." And because of that "and," they rightfully argue, HarperCollins rightfully argues, that both conditions must apply. And we can't get both conditions to apply in any 12-month accounting period. So she's pretty much never going to have to get her rights back. Or they keep coming back and saying, yeah, you can get your rights back, but you have to buy out what's left in our inventory. We have 300 copies left in our warehouse. Go ahead and buy those at cost, and then send us another letter and ask us again. Right? It's never going to be a given. So it can be really nasty. Most companies are not that nasty. Most companies are like, yeah, you got a point. And they'll sign you a letter and you get your rights back. But
yeah, Chris Goff mentioned, she said she learned the hard way. I sold my backlist to a publisher who sold the company immediately to someone else. Then the two ended up in litigation. and my books ended up in limbo for over 2 years.
Yeah.
Had I had a contract where a sale meant I could choose, I would not have had to go through that.
Yep. And the biggest point, if you as authors end up negotiating your own contract, the best point you can make in getting a publisher to change a clause like that is that you cannot prevent me from making a living, right? You can't stand in my way when it comes to me earning revenue from my work. And a lot of publishers will be like, okay, yeah, you're right.
It seemed like there was quite a bit of resistance when the indie market, Amazon market got going, and a lot of mid-list authors kind of got dumped from all the mergers and acquisitions, and they wanted to get their backlists. It seemed like there was quite a struggle there for them to get those rights back so they could re-release books on Amazon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And a lot of publishers were like, whoa, wait a minute. But yeah, it just makes sense. If you as the publisher are not going to actively sell the book, then give it back.
Right.
Yeah.
What about marketing? There's a question here about marketing. How much promotion can authors expect from a mid-level publisher? And then also, so indie authors can kind of run their own Facebook ads, Amazon ads, kind of do their own marketing. How much control does an author have with to advertise with a traditional publisher? Can they run their own ads, or do they have to pass everything through that traditional publisher? Or?
I think that probably varies from house to house, from editor to editor, from publicity team to publicity team. It probably depends a lot on the audience, if it's written for a middle grade versus adult market, right? You have to think differently about marketing to children and about what you're kind of allowed to do and say to those readers. So I think that's kind of a case-by-case thing. And I mentioned earlier the 80-20 idea that 20% of a publisher's list, we can expect they're going to get 80% of the marketing budget. Do they have a marketing budget for you? Yeah. Is it going to be a lot? Probably not. Are you going to be expected to invest? No one can actually tell you you have to. But I will say that those of our clients who are marketing minded and who do invest some of their own money up front to do some innovative and kind of cool marketing pushes, it pays off. It pays off for them.
Are they allowed to do that from their publishers?
They should be, absolutely. You would still, in good faith, want to keep your publicity team informed. So you wouldn't want to just go rogue and do your own thing, right? You'd want to you call your agent and you'd be like, hey, I have this idea. I want to do this promo. What do you think? And your agent will probably be like, oh, all right, well, let's call your editor and let's have a chat. Like, let's pull the publicity person in too. So it's just always a good idea to keep everybody on your team informed. The last thing that you want is to kind of be accused of anything, right? Like, oh, well, they're not a team player. They didn't tell us when such and such happened, especially if you do something that causes a big boom, like on Twitter or something, right? And it goes south. It didn't go the way you expected. Then your publisher's mad at you, and they have a right to be. So yeah, it's always a good idea to be forthcoming, get ideas, listen to what they're saying. But yeah, you also don't want them to tell you not to do it, right? So they'll probably have some ideas for things that you can do. Hopefully you're part of that 20% that's going to get the big slice of the marketing pie. But you never know. But do know that marketing dollars that you put in, if you do it smartly and you know what you're doing, then you should see some return for that. How much, it's hard to say, or what percentage, I don't know. But yeah, you are always going to be your book's best advocate. And readers love you as the author, right? And they get to know you because of the face you put forward. And then they get more excited to read more of your books. So yeah, don't be afraid to get out there. It's scary. I know as introverts, like, don't make me market. But here's a quick anecdote. One of our clients is Marie Lu, and she's a multi-New York Times bestselling author of young adult sci-fi and fantasy, and she's got several huge trilogies out there. Kristen signed her when she was like 19 years old. So when she broke big, she was young, didn't, and her publisher invested in publicity coaching for her and kind of helped her develop her public persona, which was a good thing. And she's just a fabulous human. Just had her first baby, kind of fun. We always feel like there are babies too.
So Chris asked, do you recommend an author find a publicist? What if you're not a great marketer? How do you find someone with great ideas like that?
Yeah, I think there's back in the early days of self-publishing, I think there were a lot of people hanging out their shingles, like, I'll be your marketer, I'll be your publicity person. And it was too early for them to really know what they were doing. So I think a lot of writers felt like if they did hire that professional or quasi-professional, they were kind of flushing money down the drain. There wasn't a lot of measurable return for that investment. I think it's probably different now. And we have had clients who have hired, if they didn't feel they were getting the support from their publisher, they went ahead and hired their own publicity person. And, mixed results. I would say if you're thinking about doing it, definitely get some references, definitely find out what they've done for other books in your genre. Because again, genre is huge and it matters. Different readerships can be reached in different ways. So that would be something to consider too, but ask for references.
Sounds good. One last interesting question here. Maybe we can end on this. Did Angie comment on the Internet Archive pandemic library situation? Has it affected Nelson authors? It
has not affected us. And let me clarify, you're referring to recently the opening up and making available of everything, regardless of copyright.
Right.
Yeah, we are definitely among those who say no. And it's so hard because, yeah, I guess kind of their heart was in the right place. A lot of people are offering a lot of free content right now, and huge rock stars are doing concerts from their living rooms, and like there's kind of this outpouring of like, let's share and be open. But copyright is still copyright, and that should be the author's choice, not anybody else's. And so the directive that we have to ask to not be included is so backwards that I can't imagine we won't see some legal ramifications down the road. But we have gone ahead and requested that each of our authors be removed. So weird.
You recommend that other indie authors and other authors do that? Request that they're removed?
If it were me, I would do it. I would request that my stuff be removed because I respect copyright law. And I think if we stop respecting copyright law, that's a slippery slope that would be really hard to climb back up. And there are other countries, so that brings up the whole idea of selling your books into, say, China or Iran, who don't have the idea of personal property, that, like, as a culture, that doesn't occur to them to even worry about. So we had an Iranian publisher just put out one of our clients' books. And unless we wanted to get all tangled up in copyright law or an international, event, we had to just let it go. And we reached out and said, hey, would you at least, give the author a couple $1,000, like at least give them a little bit of an advance as a good faith measure. And they were like, no. All right, well, we'll let that go. I mean, not like royalties in that market are going to be huge anyway, but I think that's copyright law is to be respected.
Totally agree. Well, I think that's it. Does anybody else have any other last minute questions? Margaret, you want me to turn it back over to you? Thank you so much, Angie, for joining
Thank you,
us.
Lori. Great job on going through all the questions. I appreciate it.
I hope I got everyone.
Yeah.